Still plenty of post-election news to digest in our town, so this special correspondence edition of Off the Record. Thanks for tuning in. On the rundown, Democrats underperform in the state of Michigan. The race for governor begins to take shape, believe it or not. And around the OTR table, Craig Mauger, Clara Hendrickson, Simon Schuster, and Chad Livengood. Sit in with us as we get the inside out. Off the Record.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communication agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. And now, this edition of Off the Record with Tim Skubic.
All right, thank you very much for tuning in for Off the Record. Still lots of stuff to digest from what happened last week. I want you to give me a couple of words to describe the governor's reaction to what happened last Tuesday.
Surprising.
Surprising?
I would go surprising.
In what regard?
It was not what I was expecting Governor Whitmer to say.
I have the exact same reaction. I was going to use surprising as well. You're seeing Democratic governors talking about Trump-proofing their states. She's talking about shared priorities.
I'd say the same boat, but at the same time, I think it's kind of par for the course for her.
I think she probably saw some of the tea leaves developing early and some of the problems.
It was tepid and non-confrontational. You like that or not?
I think that's
yours
true.
is better, yes.
Why?
Well, she has a history with Trump, right? He has
exactly.
antagonized her, and so she's probably mindful of that. But, you know, she is governing a state that voted for Trump. This is a very different set of political calculations than the blue state governors.
Yeah, and I mean, one of her political mantras, I think maybe the foremost one is, I'm willing to work with anybody to get things done.
Yes.
And so, I mean, if you're going to stick with that and practice what you preach, you know, she's sort of boxed in rhetorically.
But it points to a Democratic Party that I think does not know where to go right now.
They're in search of themselves.
That's true.
What powered the Democratic Party to victories after 2016? It was this resistance movement. People going out in the streets. People being out to oppose Trump. It powered this party to massive victories in 2018, 2020, and 2022. And now you have one of the leading governors of a battleground state kind of sitting back and saying, well, let's try to work with the guy. And you've got other Democratic governors, Pritzker in Illinois,
the wagons in the circle.
saying, let's go to war with this guy. And let's prepare for this. And it's fascinating.
But she went to war already. I mean, to Craig's point, and she won election on that women's movement that came out of 2017, and so she's got to find a new beat to march to now.
I actually think she thinks that she might be able to weasel her way into the Oval Office and actually establish a relationship, or is that too far-fetched?
No one weasels their way into the Oval Office, and so she's going to have to find a new way to go at it with this guy, and so she also has some things that she wants right now. She wants big, major federal incentives for semiconductor plants, and probably doesn't want some of these EV plant projects to go up and smoke. And so she's trying to find a way to basically let's get him on board. Maybe he gets some credit. He can say, I brought manufacturing jobs back to Michigan, and then she can
that $7,500 a tax credit. That's a non-starter for her.
Well, but that's not a done deal yet. I mean, I wouldn't totally wave that off, because there's a lot of union jobs that are tied to that $7,500 tax credit. That's what it was all designed for. And if those jobs start disappearing, Trump will hear it and feel it, and people in marginal seats like John James, congressman in Macomb County, will definitely feel it.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of strategy at play here. And the thing that's really working in Whitmer's favor right now is that the big tentpoles of the domestic policy agenda that Biden and Trump both share are reindustrialization. And so obviously their vision for how they're going to go about that and the sectors that they want to boost are substantially different. But if Whitmer can, maybe not necessarily through genuflection, but persuasion, sort of get Trump's administration towards those priorities and just not even necessarily endorse them, but at least just abide them, then, there's sort of a trajectory that can be maintained.
She's staking her entire second term on economic development. Yep. And if Donald Trump uses his, this 2 years that they're going to share when they're both in power, if he starts using those 2 years to say, I'm going to block all these projects going to Michigan because Governor Whitmer said something in the press that made me upset, that's going to be devastating for Whitmer's final 2 years in office. So, I mean, I think she's kind of in a difficult spot
It
here.
also will be devastating for J.D. Vance's presidential campaign, because if he does block a bunch of major manufacturing development, then there's no comeback for J.D. Vance to talk about in 2 years when he tries to run for president, presumably.
4 years, yeah.
And let's talk about the thing that hasn't been mentioned yet, which is, as to Craig's point, a lot of the sort of Trump resistance was animated by a sort of new energy in the women's rights movement. Abortion has been a huge issue for Whitmer. She's a national voice on that. A lot of Dems thought this year was going to be a repeat of 2022 when abortion was such a strong issue for them that helped win elections. This time we did see voters in some states passing abortion rights measures, but also voting for Trump. And so they were able to disentangle that from the Republican and this issue.
I completely agree with what Clara said, and that well has definitely run dry. But I think if you zoom out even further, I think that the big bet that Democrats had is that 2020 was sort of a repudiation of Trump, that it was, an enduring repudiation of him, and that this was going to be a return to form, a sort of normal politics, quote unquote. But I mean, 2024 shows that voters have not enduringly repudiated him, and that the realignment that he spurred in 2016 has continued, and that this is the new normal that Gretchen Whitmer has to live in.
A perfect example of where this governor was during the little scrum yesterday as she's walking off into the sunset. Somebody asked her the question, what do you think about the AG appointment? What do you think she said? I'll work with anybody who's confirmed. You like that? Talk about a PC response. Now, there was a bomb ready to be tossed, and she didn't, okay? She's an attorney. She's got to be obviously concerned, but she punted on it. This is part of her strategy. There's nothing she does it's all calculated. Does it buy her anything in the White House?
I mean, I think that's the attempt she's trying to make. I'd hate to guess on that because this is the whole strategy that she seems to be playing. But will this strategy hold? I mean, there were times in 2020 during COVID where she was trying to work with the Trump administration. And she would say positive things about what the Trump administration was doing. And then the next day she would turn around and bash them during a press conference. So, I mean, I don't know if we can say yet that this is the full tack that she's going to go. She might say something tomorrow that is totally different than what she said.
But she did say in the post-election, I've worked with them before, I can work with them again. Didn't she say that?
I thought that was interesting. It didn't seem to go very well when she was working with them before in 2020.
Mike Shirkey would like a word.
Mike Shirkey. Let's never mind. How did the Democrats underperform in our state when everything was teed up? The abortion issue, the female issue was going to turn out in large numbers, and they got squat.
I mean, it was an election about Joe Biden. People were very frustrated with Joe Biden's handling of the economy. And Kamala Harris made a decision when she got in the race that she was not going to differentiate herself from Joe Biden at all. I mean,
wrong.
It was the wrong decision. She could have come out initially and said, here are 4 policy issues that I'm going to be different than the current president on. Lay those out, run on those. When you get asked the question, you have an answer. She made a decision to go a different way and double down on everything Biden has done. And all of the polling that our media outlet and others had done this year showed that people were not happy with Joe Biden and were actually furious with the way he was leading the country.
Given the showing that Mr. Trump had in Michigan, would it have made any difference? If he was bringing all of these people out that weren't voting before, I don't think that would have counteracted that.
A lot of the die was cast early in this election. True. I mean, and inflation was just, even though inflation had gone down in the last 12 months, the damage had been done. These certain, daily goods were 20% higher than they were at the beginning of the Biden administration, and there was no way for them to, sort of change that, so real narrative in people's wallets.
Are you saying, Mr. Livengood, that regardless of who the D candidate was, they would have lost?
Probably.
Whoa! You sure you want to stick to that?
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, there was the polling was showing this. The polling was showing problems with Biden.
But at the end, they also said the democracy thing all of a sudden was the #1 issue.
But that was with people who I think were already voting Democratic.
Yes.
I mean, I think that was the difference between these two candidates and the two campaigns. Very smartly, Donald Trump's campaign said, we're going to focus wholly on the persuadable voters, the people in the middle.
A lot of people in this town said that'll never work.
And people had doubts about the low propensity voter thing, but that was their strategy. And you know what? It worked. And meanwhile, the Democrats, you can talk to people who worked on the campaign, And they will tell you the party was focused on turning out the base voters. They were not doing the persuadable doors. They weren't trying to win over any Republican voters at the doors. They were trying to turn out their voters. And it was not enough in this election. They miscalculated, it seems.
You never win with your base.
It's sort of ironic how much that's an inverse of sort of what happened in 2020. I think Trump relied on base turnout, and then Biden's campaign really looked on persuasion and outrage towards his handling of the pandemic to get voters out. But you look at what Trump was able to do electorally through low propensity voters, through increasing his base among these minority groups, it's a 150,000 vote increase over what he was able to do in 2020. And that's huge.
So this race throughout it just looked and smelt and felt like 2016 all over again. The difference was in 2016, 74,000 people didn't vote for president. In this race, 86,000 people only voted for president, and then they turned their ballot. And that's why Mike Rogers lost. Or couldn't get a coattails win because of all these people just filled out one bubble, put the ballot in the machine, and that, to Craig's point, the low propensity voter was the carried the day.
Well, let's pick up on that because Mr. Rogers finished, if the number is correct, 105,000 votes behind Trump. Now, wouldn't you think I vote for the president and the next vote is for the U.S. Senate? Wouldn't it go to the R?
I mean, I actually think that this is probably more a story about Elissa Slotkin's strength as a candidate. And I mean, she's a formidable fundraiser. She's won really tough races. I think it's maybe less about Mike Rogers' weakness as a candidate.
I was told that the conservatives didn't like Mike Rogers, that he was a Liz Cheney Republican.
Well, I mean,
kind of same camp, yeah.
I mean, that was the history that he was battling, but this was a nationalized election, and I think the Biden Trump and then Harris Trump, that was dominating everything. And we were hearing, at the news from people at some polling places across the state who were saying that voters were coming in, marking Trump, and leaving. I don't think that's necessarily a question of do these people know what's going on in the Senate race. I think it's a question of they were being driven by Trump and by a frustration with what was happening in the White House, and they were coming out to vote on that race. And I don't think there was a connection made by the Rogers campaign between the frustration people were feeling about the economy at the presidential level. He wasn't able to draw that down into the Senate race successfully, I don't think.
Yeah, if I'm a Republican strategist right now working in Michigan, I think the thing that's keeping me up at night is the sustainability of Trump's electoral coalition. I mean, forget the Senate race. Let's look even to the very bottom of the ballot, the Michigan Supreme Court. Democrats had about 1.2, or Republican Supreme Court nominees had about 1.2 million fewer votes than the Democratic nominees, which just shows the sort of gulf in awareness that Republican-aligned voters had, or even just the lack of interest that they had in these really significant races in Michigan.
But it doesn't, I mean, it's always key to point out on that. It does not mention what party you are on the ballot.
But that means that you have to have the funding and the interest and the awareness for voters to know who to go to. And the funding was nearly 9-1 when you look at inside and outside spending.
Yeah, I mean, the Republicans didn't really contest those races, right?
No.
All right, so all of you have been writing about the race for governor. How dare you do that? Look, I can hear people at home going, listen, Skubic, we just finished one election, but we got to go to the next one because of what Mike Duggan did this week.
Yes, Mike Duggan, the mayor of Detroit, decided not to run for a fourth term.
Nobody's surprised by that?
Not really, no, but he didn't. What he did left open was whether he's going to run for governor, and he has not made a declaration on that. Or
he didn't have to.
He didn't have to. No. He likes to draw things out like any experienced politician. So
he's doing it behind the scenes.
Maybe.
No, Chatteroo. No, this is not a maybe issue. I have too many
Craig
people.
Craig and I differ on this a little bit.
All right, well, let's go
Craig
for it.
Craig has actually some evidence about what's wrong with the early Duggan campaign. What's he missing right now?
I mean, I think he's in a difficult spot in this race, just by the makeup of the Democratic primary electorate. I mean, that's I think something people have to watch. Who are the Democratic primary voters now? It's not the same as a general electorate. It's not the same. These are different people. Female candidates have done extremely well in Michigan in Democratic primaries. You've got a female candidate who's known very heavily statewide, who's sitting in the Secretary of State's office, who's probably watching what Mike Duggan's doing, and also written a book that's going to come out. Yeah. Jocelyn Benson could also jump into this race, and this Duggan Benson. I mean, this is going to be fascinating.
She's already in the race.
Okay.
I mean,
there's no judge. She's already off the diving board. she's at the deep end
Swimming
of the
around.
pool. Do you agree?
I think that the writing's more or less on the wall at this point, and I think the important thing to note is that highly engaged Democratic primary voters are really interested in this idea of protecting democracy, of maintaining democratic institutions, and there are few, non-federal figures in the United States that are more prominent in this issue than Jocelyn Benson.
And what was the other biggest issue for Democratic primary voters? Abortion rights. And who's going to speak to that issue more clearly? Jocelyn Benson or Mike Duggan? That's the situation Duggan finds himself in. He's got to figure out how to channel the frustration about the economy, the future of the Democratic Party, and show that he is the person that's going to speak to that future, not Jocelyn Benson.
Remember, he learned this game at the need of a guy named Ed McNamara,
That's right.
who knew a thing or two about politics, both the
But that was old machine Democratic politics, and it's different now. It is way different. And whether he can go in and speak to younger generations really remains to be seen. Convincing older Detroiters to vote for you, or write your name on a piece of paper in 2013, the most improbable write-in campaign ever, where people were, spelling Duggan and Dugan and all sorts of different versions, and even just white guy. They literally people wrote that in too. This guy has shown he has many lives, but yes, he can go raise money from the swells in the Points and the Bloomfields, but can he actually use that to get votes from younger generation of voters?
And this is another thing we argue about sometimes. The fundraising for a candidate for governor now in a Democratic primary is totally different than it was 10 years ago. It used to be, rich people in Michigan, labor groups, you go out and get those people to donate and you're ready to go.
City.
That's not how it works now. You've got to have a presence on MSNBC, CNN. You've got to have this massive small donor base across the country of people writing you checks of $5 and $10. And Duggan does not have that to the degree that Jocelyn Benson has that right now, and that's something he's going to have to get over.
wait a minute. Claire's been strangely silent here.
I don't know if I'm ready to start covering another election. We're quick to move on here, but
We got 10 minutes to fill,
it's
please.
it's going to be I think a very, very crowded. We've mentioned Duggan, we've mentioned Benson. Gilchrist might be interested in the job. There are questions about Mick Morrow's path moving forward. So it's going to be a very crowded field of potentially interested candidates. And we haven't really talked about what the Republican side is going to look like as well. But
let's talk about what I'm affectionately referring to as the governor's open seat curse, which is Michigan voters have a habit which we're about to describe right here. There is a distinct and historic pattern that Michigan voters have followed for the last 5 decades. They vote for one party or the other for governor, and then 8 years later, they turn around and switch to the other party.
It would appear that way, and it may well be that that will happen again.
For example, former Republican Governor Bill Milliken left office, and Michigan voters proceeded to elect a new Democratic governor, Jim Blanchard. Republican Governor John Engler served 12 years, but then was replaced by Democratic Governor Jennifer Granholm. And the same thing happened with Rick Snyder, replaced by Governor Gretchen Whitmer. So if this pattern continues, it will be the Republicans' turn to be governor in 2 years.
Given the consistency of that pattern, why one would almost think that the Democrats ought to just concede the election in 2026.
Obviously, Mr. Porn does not believe that will happen, but he does see a possible break in this pattern depending on how well the new president is doing and how much anger he might stir up in the Michigan electorate. And that could impact the race for governor and help the Democrats.
Those are some of the things that could cause an impact on the Michigan governor's race, as well as how the Republican candidates for governor support or oppose the actions of President Trump.
So Michigan voters will decide, continue with the curse of change and move to a Republican governor, or based on what Mr. Trump is doing, they might kill the curse and vote for another D. You're nodding your head there, Mog.
That was interesting. That's all I can say. The dynamics are different than they were, 8 years ago. They will be in 2026 because, what the Democrats do have going for them is now we have divided government at the state level. The Republicans have the state house. The Republicans are also going to hold the White House. So if voters are going to sit there and only blame the Democrats, that seems less likely than it may have a month ago. So if you're a Democrat, that is probably a reason to be somewhat optimistic. There's usually a backlash against the party in the White House.
Well,
There's also a trend of that.
Donald Trump enters the Michigan political arena. The question that Bernie raised, what do the Republican candidates do? Do they snuggle up to Donald Trump, or do they?
They're gonna have, absolutely. Because they have to have that. They have to have that endorsement. You can't win a primary.
What if his numbers? What if his numbers 2 years out are so in the tank in Michigan that it's a liability?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is where all of this is going to hinge. When you look at like where outsider candidates have really performed well, you go back to the 2010 primary, right? We're in the midst of a recession, and you see this outsider candidate who wasn't necessarily an establishment pick, someone who expected to do well, in Rick Snyder, coming to the forefront and ultimately win that election. I think, and then you look at the Democratic primary, if the economy is really doing poorly in almost 2 years from now, you're going to see Mike Duggan really seize that moment. And Republicans, it's going to be more difficult for them because this is going to be a midterm where they have a Republican in the White House.
For Mr. Duggan, the more the merrier. Get everybody. You want to run for governor? Yeah, come on, get in. Get in.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible.
How does he play in outstate Michigan?
That's what we don't know. I mean, that's where he's got to raise his name.
He's not Coleman Young, okay? Coleman Young was toxic in outstate Michigan. Duggan is not in the same boat.
Well, when Duggan does go around the state every once in a while, and you pick up he spoke
to the Onondagan and see if they know who Mikey Duggan is.
The Rotary Club in Hart or something like that, and you pick up
they're closed, by the way.
People are interested in, because there's a lot of people that live outstate that either they were born in Detroit or their parents lived in Detroit. Of course, they left because of all the different strife, and it's usually racial. But they have fond memories, and so when they hear great comeback story of Detroit, which Mike Duggan has a whole PowerPoint on,
you said that the more candidates, the merrier for Duggan. I mean, I think one name that has not been mentioned here that will be an X factor in this race is Chris Swanson, the Genesee County Sheriff.
Right.
I mean,
this is an X, Y, and Z factor.
He is somebody that is, I would not discount him in his ability to get out there in the media and raise attention to who he is. And I think he'll be playing for a lot of the same voters that Mike Duggan's playing for.
I mean, he's effectively the county executive in Genesee County, and he's got billboards on 75. Welcome to Genesee County. I'm Chris Swanson. I mean, it's really effective. I mean,
is he in uniform?
He's not in that one, but yeah. Then he shows up at the Democratic National Convention in uniform. I mean,
and gives a speech.
And gave a speech, and so yeah. He's,
you know what? You're not a slouch if you can get a spot on that podium.
No, he's pretty shameless about it. So
all right, let's ask. What does Governor Whitmer do? Does she sit on the sideline and let this ferment on its own, or does she wade into it, group? Ms. Hendrickson ponders the question.
I mean, what would the incentive be for her to meddle in any sort of Democratic Party and sort of put her thumb on the scale and say, I want this candidate? I mean, she might do that behind the scenes and sort of, cultivate that relationship.
Well, she does it behind the scenes. It'll be out in public.
I could see her pulling more of a Senator Stabenow approach and just sort of staying out of the Democratic primary altogether.
But isn't there a tradition in our state that the governor automatically says, Milliken said Brickley's my guy, Rick Snyder said Ryan Calley is my guy, John Legler said Dick Posthumus is my guy?
I mean, there's tradition, right? And then there's political shrewdness. These are two different things. And I think when you have to look at electability between some of these candidates, it's very varied. There's going to be a lot of different conditions at play. The worse the economy is doing, the better Mike Duggan is going to be doing. And I don't necessarily see any advantage to her, especially if there's 2028 aspirations on the horizon of meddling.
Let's go around the table. Does she stay in or out?
I think at least openly on what we see, she will stay out of this. Will she work behind the scenes? I think that's very likely. I mean, this is a wild prediction to make. Notice what Jocelyn Benson has been saying so far, though, about her campaign. She has been saying, I've improved the Secretary of State's offices. Now let's improve all of state government. That seems to clash with Governor Whitmer, right? A little bit? I mean, is that a little bit of a dig, or am I wrong on that?
Well, no. If you say something needs to be improved, obviously it hasn't been, you know what I'm saying?
Okay, yeah. I'm just throwing that out there.
I think she stays out.
Yeah, I think Whitmer stays out.
She stays out. If Garland Gilchrist decides to run for mayor, she will get involved in that, which would keep Garland out of this
or the 13th
race.
Congressional
or
race.
the 13th congressional.
Yeah. Somebody talked to me about lame duck. How's it going so far?
It's a little messy.
Messy.
A little.
Why messy? Why messy?
Some attendance issues, some frustrations about economic development bills really being prioritized after Trump's victory. And all of these Democratic priorities that were saved until the last minute, which isn't surprising. I mean, there are some things that are, politically fraught that you don't want to take on right before an election, but it's a long list of things that Democrats want to get done, and you have at least one Democratic lawmaker saying, if my priorities aren't moved on, I'm not going to show up.
It's such a long list that they're again taking hunting season off.
That's what I was thinking about. I mean, there are going to be certain lawmakers that are going to be out hunting for deer. I think the Democratic leadership are going to be hunting for a plan for what they're trying to do in lame duck.
Well, how come they don't have one?
I'm the wrong person to ask. I mean, it does not seem like they have a list of things that, hey, we're going to check through this, and this. We've covered the Republican lame duck sessions that have happened recently. As soon as the election was over, all right, time to turn to these 30 things that we're going to get done before we leave.
Simon.
I think we're seeing this is the fraying of the Democratic coalition. We've seen the little teases, little nibbles at this fraying, throughout their tenure. But now I think the frustration that we're seeing from some more progressive members who want to look at these things that ailed the Democrats in the 2024 election, issues that directly address working class workers. Remember in August 2023 when Whitmer said she wanted paid family medical leave? Whatever happened to that? And that's
how about
issues.
no-fault reform?
It might. It's a tight rope to walk there. But
probably.
Quickly. People think, this is going to be a lame duck. There's either two lame ducks. There's either really lame or there's just insane. And I would probably say that this ends up being insane.
All right, let's hold that tape and see if you're right. Thank you all for showing up. We appreciate it. Good show, guys. See you next week for more Off the Record. Please come back.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. For more Off the Record, visit WKAR.org. Michigan public television stations have contributed to the production costs of Off the Record.